Here on Still Unbelievable, we like to have a variety of shows and subjects. In this episode, we've taken that to heart and done something completely different. Our guests are David Johnson from Skeptics and Seekers, Clint Heacock from the MindShift podcast, and David Hayward, the Naked Pastor. I got them together with the intention of doing a show discussing the past year and what that means for those of us who create atheist content. We start light-hearted, but we quickly get to serious subjects. I hope you find the balance appropriate. After this episode was done, Clint invited David Johnson onto his MindShift podcast to discuss race. That episode has already gone live, and if you haven't heard it, the link is in the show notes. I consider it a privilege to have got to know David over the past few years, and the conversation he has with Clint is quite simply the best one I have heard him do. Please listen to it. You will be challenged and educated. Hello everybody, welcome to another episode
Skeptics
of
and Seekers.squarespace.com.
Yep, that's the one, and that is how this episode is going to go.
Windows is not a real operating system.
Oh dear.
There we go.
I feel like I jumped a
Gone to shit within 2 seconds.
Dear listeners, I said to the gang, I said, make this fun and make sure you plug your brands, and my guests have taken me absolutely at my word. This is what happens when an Englishman says something sensible or vaguely interesting to an American, and we've been in trouble ever since. Right. So basically what we're going to do for the next hour and a bit is we're going to review the past 18 months, what COVID has meant for us, what the last 18 months of being an atheist has meant to us, what has changed, what our highlights are, what our lowlights are, see where it goes. So I've got a bundle of guests. You've probably recognised one of the voices. We've got David from Skeptics and Seekers. Regular listeners will know that we're always partnering up with him. So I owed it to him. That's really the only reason why he's here, is I owe him a favour. It wouldn't actually have been a guest of choice, but there we have it.
The funny thing is, he actually thinks that this is in lieu of the money he owes me. But sure, it's a start.
Yes. Another person I've got on the line is Clint Heacock from, I said it wrong last time, I'm going to see if I get it right, from the MindShift podcast. Is that right? Have I got it right this time?
Yep, I haven't even changed it yet. That's right.
Excellent. Well, welcome back, Clint.
Thank you.
I was on your podcast, crumbs, almost a year ago now. It wasn't really that long ago. I stopped by and saw you over at the castle.
Yes, that's true.
And now you're back here onto us again. So welcome back, Clint. I'm really interested in hearing what you've got. And you've brought a friend with you, somebody who I have known about, but managed to avoid talking to. But here he is. We've got David Hayward, the Naked Pastor. Welcome, David. I hope this rabble isn't going to be too out of control for you, but thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thanks. Yeah.
So basically, who wants to go first? Who's had the best year yet? I
want to go first.
Who can beat buying a new car in the Taylor household? Come on, somebody can beat that.
Oh no, I'm not even going to try that. I just want to say for the listeners, Windows is not a real operating system, and Visual Basic is not a real programming language.
Oh,
you can
okay. All three people understood that.
I'm not sure what that
cared about it.
Atheism, but I'm hurt.
So this is our sort of this is Matthew and I's sort of ongoing joke between each other, and he said have fun starting out. So this is what qualifies as fun for me and Matthew. So
obviously Mac guy.
Yes, I'm a Mac guy, and if Microsoft has a language, it's Visual C#. It's not Visual Basic. And, so there you go. Anyway, on with the relevant show, which means I'm going to shut up and hand the microphone over to somebody who deserves it.
Now that we got that out of the way.
I have something to say. I hope this doesn't come off as weird, but I would like to get the two guests on video together and roll around naked in their beards. Is that okay?
He is the naked pastor.
Because they're distracting. They're luxurious, and
that's
I don't
true.
know.
It takes a lot of work to get to this length here. Yeah, but
Yeah,
the thing is,
and for
David's
those
in
of-
Nova Scotia and I'm in the UK, so it's kind of hard to roll around naked at the moment. I guess we could do it, in our rooms where we're at now.
If the desire is strong enough, we can work
Yeah, but
something
I
out.
can roll
This
around
is what Photoshop's for, I'm pretty sure.
I can roll around naked in my beard, but for somebody else to roll around naked in my beard is another
Whole
interpretation.
nother level.
Entirely.
I think for those of you who are watching in audio, you're missing out, really.
Are they, though? I'm sure they are.
They are.
They are missing on so much.
No, so Clint and David H, they do have fantastic beards, guys. Find pictures. They're great beards. They really are.
Thank you.
That's true.
All right.
I need
So
a ladder in the background of my, whenever I'm being interviewed from now on. I need to put a ladder there because it just raises so many questions.
Oh, you can see more of it, yeah. Well, I figured everybody else who was cool was doing bookcases, and I don't have a bookcase, so I need something else. So a ladder works, yes. Because this is my man office, and the ladder is there purely and simply because I haven't done the obvious thing and moved it to the outside shed.
As you do.
Because I might need it for changing a light bulb sometime next year, and it might be raining on that day. So
Sensible thinking.
Why do I want to go to the shed?
So
that is the
actually,
ultimate.
in COVID-19 news, sort of on target for this show. Most of the listeners know that I live in Georgia in the United States, and I'd like to congratulate the state of Georgia. They were so reticent to implement good mask standards in the state that the United States has finally caught up to reopening with Georgia, who never actually closed. So Georgia, we managed
Go Georgia.
to never. We managed to hold down the average through the whole pandemic. Now, people that are fully vaccinated can go without their masks. Of course, in Georgia, that means that we have a surprisingly high number of people who have been vaccinated. You'd swear it was virtually 100% because you
No
don't
one's
see
wearing a
masks. Yeah, that's right. So if that's the standard, right, that vaccinated people can now go without masks, well, the good news is Georgia has the highest vaccination rate in the United States. Because,
I'm not sure that logic works.
yeah,
Pretty sure there's something wrong with that logic.
You guys definitely got something in your water because you bucked the trend at the infamous election the other year.
Mm-hmm.
You became the heroes to the rest of the world, and now you've got this. What is it that you guys are doing? Who's poisoned your fish?
Well, and it's so much worse, right? Because yes, we had the whole election scandal, and now that Arizona has managed to keep the lie going, right? This idea that there was some big election fraud in Arizona, and they did the whole convention amusement park playground or what? Right, the Cyber Ninja crowd, and they're coming to Georgia. So the Cyber Ninja Roadshow is now
freak show,
right.
not a road show. It ain't a road show.
And you know what's funny about that, right? Is how in the world did they land on the name cyber? If you can turn a computer on and find your way to a credible search engine, you probably have more on the ball than this particular crowd of people who call themselves cyber ninjas. Right? Not sure how we got there, but yeah. So Georgia, we are.
Yay, Georgia.
Right. Hundreds of years of tradition unmarred by progress. Welcome to Georgia.
It is weird to go to Hotlanta, Georgia, though, because I've been there, and they say it's unlike the rest of the state, isn't it? I don't know how the rest of Georgia is, but maybe you could enlighten us on that. It's very cosmopolitan. It's very mixed, ethnically, isn't it? But then I guess you go outside of Hotlanta, and it's completely different. Isn't that right? Demographically?
That is very right.
Kind of like Miami. Miami is a complete weird hot pocket down in the southern tip of Florida, and then you go out of Miami and it's totally different.
That's right. Atlanta, of course, gets accused of a lot of the election fraud that, in fact, they're going to recount counties in Atlanta, right? That's what these cyber ninja goofs are all about. But you don't have to look further than who Georgia elected to the Senate, right? Marjorie Taylor Greene. So if you want a good picture of the dichotomy of Georgia, it is that the state by and large voted Democrat as a result mostly of the Atlanta urban area and the Atlanta suburbs, while still having elected Marjorie Taylor Greene to Congress. And there's not a better picture of this sort of bipolar nature of Georgia than those two facts together.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yep. Incredible.
Sticking on the COVID-19 thing, I think one of the saddest things I've seen in recent weeks regarding COVID-19 was a tweet from a pastor. And he tweeted the tweet that I saw, I didn't see the original tweet. He said he tweeted 2 days before that he just had his COVID-19 jab, and that that following that tweet, he had lost a significant number of people from his congregation. They had submitted to the office letters of resignation of departure from his congregation, but without mentioning specifically why. But the obvious conclusion was that it was related to him publicly tweeting that he'd had the COVID-19 jab, whichever one it was.
Wow.
And my heart just fell.
Yeah, but I mean, we know like QAnon is spreading like wildfire in evangelical churches across America, isn't it? So yeah, there's the pandemic stuff, and I mean, there was a church in, I think it was Ohio, somewhere, that showed about a 15-minute clip of that pandemic video in a church service.
Wow.
And that was part of it wasn't like, this is nuts. No, this is true. And you need to watch this clip of this video because it's all COVID's a hoax and Bill Gates has put microchips in the vaccine and on and on and on. They're doing it to bring Trump down and all the rest of it.
It's as if he needs help, right?
It's not just the States, but it's around the world, right? This whole
it is spreading.
Kind of separatist kind of ideology is spreading. Populist ideology is spreading everywhere, including Canada. We have strains of it here. There's a church just down the road that, by and large, is pandemic kind of.
Yeah, QAnon thing.
Yeah.
Matthew, you got your video worked out there.
I can see the ladder now.
My laptop ran out of battery and suddenly went into hibernate, so I had to plug the power back in and wait for it to start back up again. So
Gotcha.
Those of you watching in audio, you're missing out on my profile.
And the beards. Or lack
yeah.
of beards in some cases.
Yes, absolutely.
So let me jump in with the COVID stuff for a moment. I think it represented on Skeptics and Seekers some of the best and worst moments all at the same time. So as many are aware, we had a push for Surviving Corona. It was a book that was jointly written by Christians and atheists. My friend Randall Rouser participated. My co-host David Russell, he wasn't a co-host at the time that I approached him on this, but he was a part of it. We had Natalie Collins, some very good Christian participation and atheist participation. And even though I had not polled any of these people on their opinions about COVID, it was nice to see that everyone was on the same page as far as what COVID was and what we needed to do. And so we were talking about in the book the issue of suffering, for instance, and how we should react to this tragedy that was upon us, the theological implications, the philosophical implications. And this book, we raised a couple $1,000 for charity, and that was very good. But the sad part, the soul-wrenching part for me was when we started discussing the subject of Corona, which we did for several weeks on the show. The Christians that we had in our commentariat were COVID deniers almost. It was this polar opposite where we didn't get to discuss the theology of suffering or any of that. We were arguing about whether COVID was actually a thing and whether, it was a totalitarian state to ask people to wear a mask or what. This was very defeating for me. One of the many defeating things from 2020 for me, that we can't even have what should be a very easy agreement on a thing that's happening to everybody in the world, because there is a theological bent that says this can't be true, and that trumps science and reality every time for a certain group of people, and that's a much larger group of people than anyone wants to admit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but it's spreading, like we said, in evangelical churches, like for example QAnon. Where you have to ask where's that belief system coming from? It's coming from these conspiracy theories, which was a big factor in that was Trump himself. Trump himself is the chief conspiracist, as president. He promoted the birther lie. That's how he got his name to fame, didn't it? That was a conspiracy theory about Obama, and he promoted all sorts, and he promoted conspiracy theories about COVID, about QAnon, and the huge number of evangelicals that support him. They've been drinking the Kool-Aid of Trump and QAnon and people like Marjorie Taylor Greene. She is an evangelical and a complete QAnon cultist.
I hear you, but the thing is, I don't believe that's where it comes from. I believe that's. Let me state this carefully. Yes, definitely QAnon is spreading this, but Christians have a choice to buy this or not. And so many Christians don't, but there is a large subset of the Christians who do. They're not buying it because they're deceived. They're buying it because there is something within their belief system that is in tune to this sort of thing. They believed this sort of thing before QAnon. They were already like this, and QAnon gave them a voice. It amplified what was there.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. When I actually was motivated to get saved when I was a young teenager by conspiracy theories and coming out of like the revelation, right, with end time kind of prophecies and all that kind of thing, and Russian leaders being the Antichrist, and
Pope,
and the Pope, and you name it, and all that kind of confirmation bias just feeds upon itself, and so I agree that a lot of this conspiracy stuff is rooted in religion, and specifically, I'll stay in my lane, Christianity, evangelical Christianity, conservative Christianity. It was rife and is rife with conspiracy theory. And so QAnon, I think unbelievers can be a part of QAnon as well. But I mean,
Sure.
I think it does have its roots in apocalyptic kind of ideology.
Yeah. Well, if you break it down. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to follow with a statement about why QAnon has spread. So I don't know if you guys are following the news on QAnon, but there's a QAnon movement that is consuming the country of Japan.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah,
Wow.
and so just to follow what David was saying for a moment, it's so I like you, David. I want to stay in my lane in the areas that I know something about. So mostly that's not very much, to be honest. But what's interesting is that these sorts of conspiracy theories, this idea of QAnon and conspiracy theory in general, has a broad range of appeal, and we have exported QAnon. What is the U.S. famous for right now? Exporting QAnon. It's quite a dubious distinction. I'm sorry, Clint, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it fits the hallmarks of, I think it's a cult. I mean, I've done several episodes on QAnon, taken a real deep dive into it. And what I discovered in doing my research was that if you look at the various elements of QAnon, it's a religion, it's a cult. Like Q is a prophet in a sense. He is predicting things that are going to happen. The Q drops are like scripture. And for the devoted follower, the adherents of the QAnon cult or conspiracy theory, they have to go in and with a certain hermeneutic, they have to decipher the Q drops, just like you interpret Scripture. It's cryptic, it's apocalyptic literature like Revelation or Ezekiel or something like that. And so there like these high priests that have arisen who are like QAnon shamans, and they explain, just like a pastor does to his or her congregation, they explain what the Q drops mean. And so this whole thing is very similar to evangelicalism, like you were saying, David, about it's already a system where you can just slot right into it, because studies have shown that evangelicals, like, for example, who believe in young earth creationism, are far more susceptible to believe in conspiracy theories. That in itself is a conspiracy theory. They don't want us to know the truth, that the earth is actually 6,000 years old. They're keeping a secret from us, and it's all in the Bible. Once you buy into that kind of thinking, it's much easier to slide into a QAnon type of thing.
But it's not necessarily conspiracy theories and believing weird things doesn't necessarily belong to religious people, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Something in the thinking that, because I know people who are atheists, who are very intelligent people, very smart, very sociable and everything, and they have some very, very weird ideas, such as they believe the earth was
flat.
That aliens from other planets came like 250,000 years ago and populated the earth with us humans, and they really believe this, and
built the pyramids and all that. Yeah.
Wait a minute, you mean they didn't?
Yeah, whoa, wait a minute.
Okay.
You just burst his bubble.
At this point, you're just talking about Hugh
what
Ross.
is this Japanese thing? Educate me.
David H., I can't tell you much about what is happening in regard to Japan and QAnon. I've only read an article or two, and I don't know enough about Japanese culture to understand what Japanese QAnon believers are fighting against, if you see what I mean. So in the United States, we know what QAnon is standing against. Well, they're standing against those Democrats who are involved in the sex trade of children, and the Democrats who are trying to defeat Trump, and the deep state, and all of the various other aspects of QAnon belief. But maybe Clint, you said you followed it a little bit. Do you know more about what the Japanese QAnon conspiracy is about from their social perspective?
Yeah, well, I think I'm kind of like you. I've read a few articles on it, and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. I think, well, going back to David Hayward's point, it's conspiracy theories in general, whether you're atheist or religious or not. I think that the appeal is they explain in quotations, the real truth about what's really going on, whether it's cabal of Jews controlling the world or aliens that built the pyramids or whatever. And they have that appeal, I think, where people are sucked in. And I think that's what's happened a little bit in Japan. They don't necessarily follow the Trump part of it so much, but they sort of bought into, this is really what's happening in society. There's this shadowy cabal, this deep state sort of thing that's controlling the world. They are slightly different than the sort of American version of QAnon.
Right.
Yeah, they call it J-anon. There's one of the aspects of Japanese QAnon is called J-anon, and they follow Michael Flynn. There's some other very strange differences between that and the American version.
Because Japan itself has had some of its own high-profile cults in the past anyway.
Yeah, I was going to say.
A cult that wanted to release poisonous gas into subways or something like that.
Yeah, the Aum Shinrikyo. They did release sarin gas in the subways and killed several people, and there was thousands that were injured as a result of breathing in this sarin gas.
Wow. Yeah.
But I'd like to carry on with this theme of conspiracy, because I remember in my own life when I was deep into young earth creationism, the Illuminati as a conspiracy theory was quite big, 30 years ago, and I remember being really sucked into that. I can't remember how I got out of it, so I won't even speculate on that, but I was definitely really sucked into the one world government and the secret plans by this shadowy group calling themselves the Illuminati, and I was really into it, and I would suck up any kind of information I could find about that. But where I want to move on to is, I was asked by a Christian only recently if I had an opinion on why there seemed to be such a higher proportion of Christians who are in this COVID denial stage versus others. And it'd be interesting to see if any of you guys agree or even partially agree with what my answer was. And I said, from my personal experience, I put it down to sections of Christianity which permit you to question science. And so for me, it was being a young earth creationist. So being a young earth creationist meant that I had to deny evolution. I had to deny an old earth. I had to deny an old universe. And so that meant that I had to deny a huge swathe of what was being said by multiple scientific disciplines, because they were clearly all wrong, because according to the Bible, the earth is less than 10,000 years old. So that mindset of denying, let's call it mainstream science, that's probably a clunky way of describing it, but denying and openly questioning and challenging mainstream science in that aspect then makes it easier to do the same for other things like COVID and vaccines, etc. So that was my answer. Do you guys think that's a fair criticism? Is there a way that you'd change that answer?
I would actually, well, first of all, yes, that's got to be a component of it. But as you know, that not all Christians believe in a young earth. Not all Christians deny COVID. So there's probably some way to dig into that. But I think, especially in the States, COVID caused shutdowns of everything, including churches. And so, unlike in other parts of the world, our churches are not funded by the government. And so if churches aren't open, people aren't giving, and church is like any other business. It depends on the collection plate. And so some churches have to close. Their business it's an existential crisis for the church when it can't open. There's also this idea that spiritualizes it, that says, well, yes, you have to attend church. Attending church is of spiritual importance. And so when the government said you couldn't gather together, I suspect that a lot of Christians read that as this is a direct assault on the church. And therefore, if it is a direct assault on the church, then it is either of Satan or it's not real, because they could not acknowledge that it was real, because if they did, they would have to say, yes, it makes sense for us to close our churches. They could never be forced in a position to say, yes, it makes sense for us to close our churches. So they attacked the attempt to close it by suggesting that COVID was some kind of fake. And so I think that that's probably some of what happened, at least here in the States.
Here are
I think
two things.
in Canada, there's it's not just science, but liberal power as well. So, you know, when a liberal is in power, then it's immediately questioned, because I have loved ones. There's people I love, people in my family who are anti-government as long as it's liberal, but as soon as it's conservative, such as Trump or whatever, and I'm in Canada, we have some conservative strains as well as up here, then they're all for it. But it's the interesting though, when let's say a province shuts down, locks down church services, and it's a conservative government, you say, well, listen, why would they persecute their voting base? Why would a conservative leader persecute Christians and shut their churches down as a way of persecution? Like, it doesn't make sense, right? They're doing it because of COVID and to keep people safe and to not spread the disease and so on. But immediately they turn against the government as somehow they've been bought and sold, and they've bought into the liberal strain. You know, they haven't got the strength anymore to be leaders, and so I just find it very fascinating. Yeah.
Two of the things that I saw here in the Southeast United States that I thought were fascinating had to do with well, I'll start with early mask rules. So the way a lot of conservative evangelicals fought against COVID and continue to fight to this day have to do with early mask rules. So as the pandemic was evolving, the World Health Organization and the CDC had evolving mask guidelines. Why? Because, well, you might remember that first we weren't sure about how long COVID lived on surfaces, right? And so we had the idea that not only did you need to wear masks, but you need to sanitize your groceries and all of that kind of thing. And at some point, and you didn't necessarily need to wear masks outdoors, but you needed to wear masks indoors. And there was a question early on about which side of the group of people needed to wear masks. Was it those who were sick or those who were not sick or both? And those rules early on, from sort of early March or right in that time, 2020, into the summer, those rules continued to evolve. And that was because we were in the process of understanding the pandemic. Well, the Christian messaging in the conservative parts of the United States went something like this. If science can't tell us when we need to wear our masks, why should we trust it about the rest of the COVID pandemic? Well, of course, the problem was that it was science penetrating the pandemic, right? It was science's evolving understanding that caused mask rules to evolve. But conservative Christianity is very they're anti-change, right? Very nervous about anything that changes, and that's where you get sort of biblical literalism and all that sort of thing. They need an authoritative source that is timeless, or at least it seems to be that way. So that was one of the problems. And then the other messaging that we still get now around masks and around just taking your vaccine shot is, I'm free not to. It has become a fight, not about the disease, but about the individual right not to do something. And that messaging has in fact lowered the U.S.'s uptake in terms of accepting a vaccine. Now,
just to add to that real quick, this is in the news and think pieces are being written about it even now, but the fight has gone from metaphorical to literal. People are becoming extremely violent. There are many violent incidents being reported from people who refuse to wear masks, and when they're confronted, violence breaks out. And so
we're seeing it on airlines.
Yeah, people have been shot and killed.
Yeah,
people in stores.
Right. Now, there is one more bit of this that I want to be fair about for our conservative listeners. So I think this is there's some reason to say, well, I want to be cautious about the vaccine that I take. Why? Because there has been a little bit of trouble with the J&J vaccine, right? We pressed pause on it a couple of times because maybe we got to market faster than we really wanted to. Now, I think that there's been an overabundance of caution. But what I am saying is it's not as if there has been zero news saying, well, the vaccines, we should be careful about who takes it, right? So we have had incidents where we had to press pause on J&J because there was legitimate scientific evidence saying we needed to press pause.
Yeah, I appreciate that you being gracious to that group, but these are the people who also swallowed the idea that 5G towers.
That's not who I'm talking about, and that's not.
I'm just saying these
that's
are.
Not who I'm talking
I don't
about,
think for a moment
who I mentioned.
that they're residents.
That's
I
not
don't think they're
who I'm talking about, and that's not who I mentioned.
My social media feed is full of English people complaining that since they've had the jab, they haven't got an improved 5G reception. So it's really quite poor.
They're,
That's
I
because
mean,
they're still running
shocking.
a
Windows.
lot of these people they were looking for a reason to be suspicious anyway. And so when we do something science-based, like say, okay, we're going to hold off on the J&J drug for a few weeks and look at it, they're quick to say, aha, I told you so. They're not looking at it and saying, oh, that's interesting. They're already there. And so it's really hard to take their concern seriously, because these were people who were COVID deniers in the first place in a lot of cases. I'm not saying that there aren't those who seriously had some caution, but those people that we have been bending over backwards to say they're vaccine hesitant, they're just vaccine fools. I do not bend over backwards to give them room. They're stupid, they're selfish, and I wish they would drop dead so that the rest of the population could maybe have a chance to live. So take your hesitancy and shove it up your.
How
do you really feel?
Clearly, how do you know?
Listen up. This is not a medical podcast, and if you are listening, do not take anything said here as medical advice. I've got a friend that lives a few miles away right now.
Hang on a minute. If
Hold on. I need to finish.
Hydroxychloroquine.
I need to finish this.
Yeah, I saw that.
Hold on, I need to finish this PSA. I've got a friend who's a nurse right now. She's immune compromised. Her doctor has told her that right now she can't take vaccine boosters because J&J does present an elevated risk of blood clots. And as a result, when the vaccine boosters come out, they are going to wait for her. So don't take medical advice about the vaccine from this podcast.
Yeah.
We're not doctors, and it is possible that you are in a higher risk group. And if you are, you should consult your doctor and you should follow their advice. You should not, however, follow QAnon. They're also not.
Well, and just to be clear, someone who has a medical condition that is in that category, that is not what anyone is calling vaccine hesitancy. They're not hesitant over the vaccine. They're in a compromised group where they're following medical advice. These people that we are very generously labeling vaccine hesitants aren't following any medical advice.
Okay. I said those who are being conservative. So again, we're talking about two different groups of people.
So my wife's a nurse, and we're friends with people in the nursing profession, the doctor profession, medical profession. That's one of the things that kept coming up with people I know and loved ones I have who say, look, they keep changing their story. This is proof that they're lying. And,
Can't get their story straight.
And, pulling J&J off the shelves and the AstraZeneca off the shelves, and then now it's available to younger people and blah, blah, blah. I was talking to a good doctor friend of mine, very smart guy. He's like, well, that's actually shows that it's probably more accurate is because it's developing. I mean, this is an emergency. Yeah. This is developed news.
Yeah, they had to rush it.
I mean, I heard months ago about COVID vaccine affecting women's menstrual cycles, and I thought, oh, here we go. And, well, now the University of Illinois is conducting research and studies and asking for women who've actually experienced a change in their menstrual cycle. I have friends who've lost their periods. I have friends whose periods have gotten worse. Yeah, we're not medical professionals here, and but this is, like my doctor friend said, this is probably evidence that this is real research that is, developing every day
in real time.
Right. And not all of it. So another important issue here is that the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer BioNTech vaccine are mRNA vaccines, and the J&J vaccine is not. Why is that important? Because they're not the same kind of vaccine. So it may very well be that there are cases where your doctor would recommend one and not recommend the other. So don't take news that J&J was shelved as a reason to think that your doctor would therefore say don't take any of them, right? Because the overwhelming medical advice is get your vaccine, right? That's
right.
So David, I'm sorry, David.
Well, I was gonna jump in there. I had going back to Matthew's point about evangelicals and the COVID vaccine. I've been doing a lot of research on Christian homeschooling in America. I've been doing an article that's coming out in the Public Eye Journal, and I'm doing a study on the impact of Christian Reconstructionism on homeschooling and dominion theology, which is a whole nother discussion. But one of the interesting things I did in my research was I uncovered a lot of homeschoolers. You can look at it as a case study. So, for example, a huge number of them were already anti-vaccine, decades ago anyway.
Yeah.
They believed that vaccines cause autism and all kinds of other conspiracy theories. So to go into COVID, they already were jaundiced. They were already super suspicious of any vaccine, period. And what we're finding now, this is a really interesting development. Suddenly, there's a huge upsurge in the homeschooling movement because it's a loophole in a lot of the state's laws whereby if you're a homeschool student, you don't have to get a mandatory vaccine, which is what they're talking about is coming. And they're saying, I want to homeschool my kids because I don't believe in this vaccine, and that's my loophole to get my kids out of it. So we're seeing a lot of stuff going on. You can use that as a case study, and a lot of the language they're talking about is this so-called COVID passport. They're saying, you see, they're going to use that. That's the next step. It's the COVID thing on steroids. They're going to close down churches. They're going to limit your travel. It's the mark of the beast. We're hearing that language coming out. They're going to close down foreign mission trips and all the rest of it. So this is the language that's going on in that sort of real conservative evangelical community right now.
Right, and some of the things that I reported on early on, talked about, I shouldn't say reported on. I'm not a reporter. Is the way preachers were talking about COVID early on. Once again, these are preachers who were afraid of losing their income, and so they would tell large audiences that Jesus is your vaccine.
Yeah.
God is your vaccine.
I blow this vaccine.
And so you would be shocked at the number of people who buy into that. And once you have bought into that, you would see any external vaccine provided by a government that you consider to be suspicious anyway as showing faithlessness to the vaccine that you already have in God. And so there is kind of a natural bias against this vaccine once you have bought into the idea that God has vaccinated you via faith.
Yeah, or you're going to be protected. Look how many churches refuse to close, like Tony Spell down there in Louisiana, John MacArthur, Dr. John MacArthur, president of Masters Seminary. He's in trouble right now with the LA County authorities for refusing to close his church and not having people wear masks and all that because he said, basically, God will protect you, Psalm 91, all that kind of thinking.
You brought up an interesting point a moment ago, Clint. So very simple question to the rest of you. Would the acceptance of the COVID vaccine have been better if it hadn't been for Andrew Wakefield 25 years ago? He's the guy that launched the whole vaccines cause autism thing.
He's the one that lost his medical license eventually.
Yeah.
Right. It's still a huge belief. Yeah. It's done a huge amount of disservice.
Is the after effects of his propaganda, or whatever you want to call it, of his
conspiracy
nonsense
theory?
Yeah, is the after effects of that, has that made COVID vaccine hesitancy worse?
I think
that
so.
group still quotes his research. So.
Well, they just came out with a survey not long ago. Pew Research: 45% of white evangelical Christians do not want to get the COVID vaccine. That's almost half of them. And that's the latest survey just a week or two ago. Almost half.
Isn't there another survey? 53% of Americans still think Trump's the true president.
Yeah. And there's an overlap with that demographic. It's largely the same group, isn't it? They're Trumpists, they're white evangelicals, they're angry, they're shrill, they're embracing QAnon, they're Trumpists and all the rest of it.
3/4 of Republicans they're on CNN this morning. So if you're a conservative Fox News listener, you're not going to hear what I have to say. Okay, so fine, I'm going to go ahead and say it anyway. There was a CNN poll, CNN and SRS poll conducted, and something like 75% of Republicans think that the 2020 election was stolen, and
still believe it.
So, yeah.
Yep.
So
big lie.
Is it possible to? I know this is not my show, but I was just getting a little down, and I know this is supposed to be a little bit lighthearted. Is it possible for us to move on to something like, say, race riots?
Because that's so much lighter of a subject.
Yeah, we have. I was going to just try to move on, so now it's probably a good time to.
2020 is a gift that just kept on
just
giving.
A short intermission though before we move on. I saw a story about Trump the other day. Apparently he's looking to relocate to Canada, but apparently the Canadian government say it's not Trudeau.
Oh, wow.
That's the intermission, you're saying.
David, you're spinning in your grave right now, man.
Wow. Wow.
I can't wait to get back to the show if that's the intermission.
Wow. I hope you're going to edit that out, right?
Anyone got anything else on COVID?
I might edit in a reverb.
Wow.
Wow, that's amazing.
This is what comes of Windows users and jokes, man.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
You're drinking red wine instead of beer.
Yeah, drinking red wine instead of beer. That's the true culprit there.
There's your problem.
That's the conspiracy. That is.
Yeah.
So a lot of my followers, how's this for a change of topic? A lot of my followers have discovered they don't need church.
Wow.
Rock on.
Because of COVID?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Yeah.
They've lived without church on Sundays for over a year now, and they're like, you know what? I don't need this thing.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty sweet.
So afraid of the church closures.
Not only do they not miss it.
They knew that once people got a taste of not going to church, that it's really hard to get them back, because all of the quote unquote bad things that are supposed to happen if you don't go to church didn't happen.
They're not happening.
One of the things that we've talked about briefly on this podcast in a couple of episodes is the community value of physically going to church and the interfacing with people and having a cup of tea with your friends, etc. What I heard from various Christians after 2 months of homebrewed coffee sat on the sofa watching services on YouTube was the coffee was better. They were more comfortable. When they were interfacing directly on Zoom, it was the people they cared about the most. And they were no longer being forced to talk to that awkward person at church who always makes them feel uncomfortable. That highly stressful feeling that happens when you come home from church. People who find that they come home from church and then spend the next 2 hours doing something like cleaning the house or cooking a huge meal because they need to unwind after church. All of that stuff is gone. So I'm left asking, were Christians really that good at community? Were we worshipping them for being so good at something that actually didn't exist?
Oh, man. I've got so much to say about that.
Ooh. Christians are good at community. To help lead into what you have to say there, I wonder if some of the Christian sense of community comes less from a deep desire for social responsibility and more from a sense of command, more from a sense of retribution. So there's a command about assembly in the New Testament, right? You're supposed to be there on the first day of the week, and at least in conservative circles, that carries a lot of weight. So I wonder if that helps lead into any part of what you have to say.
Well, the community, I always gravitated towards communities that I wanted to be a part of. I wanted to be there. That's kind of programmed in. It's a default that you should be there. So it's not even considered. So for me, I was always trying to find community that I enjoyed. What I wanted to talk about was, I used to say, the thing that church has to offer is community. I mean, there's no other organization on the earth, I don't think. Well, other religions offer the same kind of thing, where when you walk in, potentially, you're offered a whole network of community, friendships, events, things to do, support, babysitters, mechanics, prayer support, all kinds of things to do all week long with the community. And then when I left the ministry in 2010 and following, Lisa and I experienced that lack of community. It was painful. It was a real struggle. I was watching a bunch of documentaries on people who left cults, or documentaries on cults. And to a T, all of the people who'd left the cult or escaped the cult were in tears about how much they missed the community aspect of it. They missed the intensity of intimacy and just the support and the joy and the love. And then I started thinking, maybe that's kind of fucked up. that whole dysfunctional kind of codependency thing. And I started reading back on my own experience in community and wondered, is that really healthy actually?
Was it community?
Was it really community?
May not have been.
Dysfunctional kind of codependency, neediness, just sucking off of each other, metaphorically.
Not in every case, though.
We're going to be talking about beards here again in a second. No, so look, cults do that though, don't they? They one of the things that cults are great at is isolating you to relationships that are only the relationships you have inside the cult, and they pull you away from from your normal friend, your family relationships, your parents, or even sometimes your spouse or your children. And so I think you're right. I think there can be something really unhealthy there. That's a really good point.
I'd like to join that particular aspect of the conversation. So for the record, having also been a small-time preacher, I'm not saying you were a small-time preacher, David. I was a small-time preacher. Having been there, I don't actually think that the church is good at community. I think it's good at the idea of community.
Yeah.
So the idea is way stronger than the reality. So for preachers, and people on the inside, community is pretty good. You're the preacher. You're gonna have a casserole at somebody's house whenever you want to. But the person who sits in the third row from the back, their sense of community may not be quite that strong. Right. And there's a lot of glad handing on Sunday at service, but a lot of those people in church are hurting because they are so lonely, and they are desperate for real community. But what they don't see Monday through Saturday is anyone at their house. They're not invited to the beach party. They're not in that inner circle. And so what happens with churches is that they are as kitschy as any other organization. And if you are not socially talented, you will die of loneliness in a church that is quote unquote focused on community. Because I think it's very skin deep.
Yeah, I agree.
You can be a part of a mega church, and like you said, David, you can be absolutely lonely by choice as well. Because I was a part of a massive church in Seattle for about 5 years, and I would go on Sundays, go to the service, and then leave and walk out and go home, and that was by choice. I didn't want to really develop community. So there was probably 10,000 people in this church. It was packed every Sunday. We had 2-3 services, and yet I felt really lonely, and I thought, this isn't healthy. This can't be healthy, So I eventually plugged into a small group to get that sort of community, which that's what a lot of big churches do, don't they? They're like, well, you got 10,000 people, so you got to plug into a small home group. That's how you get your community
one-on-one. Have small groups ministries.
Yeah, absolutely.
In churches.
Yeah, so and that's how they think they're going to solve that.
Yeah, so especially for our three guests, David, and Clint. And Clint, this may be right in your wheelhouse. What accounts if Christians and Christian churches are not good at community? What accounts for the broad success and the easy replication of we've got churches on every corner in the United States, and they're all they've all got crosses on the tops of the buildings. So if Christianity is not good at community, what accounts for the easy replication of Christian community?
In America? Yeah, I mean, because it's different here in Britain. I'm sure Matthew, we have churches, a lot of churches, but it's nothing like the States. I mean, every time I go to the States, I'm struck again by how many buildings I pass on the street, one right after the other. I remember driving to work in Seattle one time, and I think I just started counting churches in my 15-minute drive. I think I counted something like 21 or 22 churches in just a 15-minute just across town. And I was like, my God, we don't have that many churches here in the UK. Nothing like that. But I think a lot of it, it's a formula, it's a model. It's like a franchise church. I mean, look at like when Mars Hill, Seattle was going on, for example. I visited one of those churches when Mark Driscoll was the pastor, and he hit upon a brilliant franchise model. It was like a Starbucks or a McDonald's. You could buy the franchise, so you could open up a building, and you'd have the service, and it was all pre-planned. He would preach. He would come simulcast on the TV screen for the sermon portion, so everyone was hearing the same message, and it was local music, and then everyone would greet and meet and go home, and it was a brilliant model for quote unquote church growth, and that worked. And he was a mega church pastor. He had 10 or 12 satellite campuses all around the Pacific Northwest. So you can do it by formula. You can do a model that works, numerically anyway.
I would also say that church growth, especially in the southern U.S., but really in my travels, I've found it to be true everywhere. But it's easy to see in the South. Churches don't necessarily grow because this was a great idea and I'm going to move it over there. Churches grow because they split. So this idea of community, these are people who are they can't get along. And it doesn't take much of a doctrinal disagreement or a personal disagreement before you've got another church. And so I used to say that churches grow by mitosis. It's just cellular splitting.
That's funny.
And so, there's kind of an illusion that this church thing is great. Look how it's caught on. There are 4 churches on one intersection. Well, that's because there used to be one church on that intersection, and they couldn't get along.
Well, so you think it's all First Baptist, Second Baptist, Third Baptist, Fourth Baptist? You think that's?
Well, I would say, jumping on David's point, statistics have shown that a lot of church growth actually is by transfer growth as well. So it's not the numbers. All you're doing is shifting numbers from one physical building to another. So, for example, mega churches are like the Walmarts of the church world. What they do when you have a mega church in a community, what you find is, it's growing numerically, but where are they coming from? They're being sucked out of smaller churches in that community. Just like when a Walmart comes to town, it destroys all the mom and pop businesses in that town, and it's growing numerically, but it's actually destroying the smaller churches around it. And we lost people in our little church in south of Portland, and they'd go to this mega church down the road because we couldn't compete with them, So they were growing by transfer growth. But if you looked at their numbers on paper, they were growing, but it wasn't by conversion growth necessarily.
Yeah, it's one of my cartoons. I have a bunch of sheep copulating, and I call it growth.
But that's another aspect, the quiverful movement. That's the dominionist piece. We have to physically populate the earth.
There's a blimp above a church with an arrow pointing down to the church, and it says, God is now here, and everybody's running from all the other churches.
The latest fad.
How it is. Wherever God moves, that's where people are going to go.
Look at the Toronto Vineyard. That's a classic case study, isn't it, of what you just said, David? Toronto Vineyard, that blew up. Everyone was coming literally from all over the world to experience this amazing Toronto Vineyard blessing. And then it died out, and then it popped up on the Solomon Islands, and then it popped up in South Africa, or and everyone flits over there, until that fad dies down, and then it's the next big thing.
Yeah.
Matthew and I had a guest this year, and I don't want to call this guest out by name because it's not that kind of. I liked this guest, but he did say to me in sort of a quiz we were talking about miracles at the time, and I'd pointed out that there's a remarkable scarcity of bona fide miracles in the United States. The more we investigate, the less it seems that there are modern miracles. And he actually said, but God is working more in Africa right now. So it was that idea. So
the blimp's flying over Africa right now.
Right, exactly. I sort of had in my head, David H. I sort of had your cartoon in my head. Now the blimp's over Africa, and it's pointing at some mountaintop over there.
That's why they flit over there, because it's the latest move of God. It happened with the Azusa revival. Same kind of thing. Back in 1906.
You know what? I grew up in Baptist and Pentecostal churches, ended up in the Vineyard. I was in the Presbyterian church. I was ordained as a Presbyterian minister for a while. But I did spend a lot of time in sort of charismatic churches that believed in healing and miracles. Never saw one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Despite all the talk.
I mean, I saw.
That's because God is always doing his work over there.
Somewhere else.
It's very, very popular for preachers to say that, yeah, the church is really growing in Africa and God is doing his movement there. And, the problem with you is that you're faithless over here. But over there, over in China, the church is suffering persecution. God is really doing his movement. He's never doing a movement at a congregation where I was.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and they were always projecting the next big thing, weren't they? It's just around the corner. There's going to be a move of God. It's the next generation's being raised up, blah, blah. I heard that so much. And I never saw the next generation getting raised up. They were saying of my generation 30, 40 years ago, we didn't get raised up, to take on the world or take the world for Jesus or whatever.
Yeah, I went around so many corners, I realized I was going around in circles. So.
Nice.
That must make a good cartoon.
I was in a highly evangelical, charismatic service a long time ago. It was a one-off service that a group from my church went and visited. I can't remember the exact reasons why we were doing this, but I was part of a prayer for healing ministry team at that moment. We would pray for people for whatever their needs were. And like David H., we never saw any miracle. And by a long stretch, the vast majority of the people that we prayed for were people who needed some kind of emotional support or guidance for a decision. We didn't really tend to pray for actual miracles. But I was, and you guys are going to really chuckle at this. We were at this service, and there was somebody there who was allegedly had this gift of prophecy. And I was literally in the back row of this thing, a few hundred people in there. And the person running the service said, this guy who's got the gift of prophecy is going to take a wander around during the next song. And when he comes back to the front, he'll say what the Lord has told him. So that happened, and he said a few things. And he literally pointed at me from the front of the church, singled me out and said, that guy there is going to have an apostolic ministry.
Maybe this is it right here. You're an atheist apostle.
So
he was right, Matthew.
Maybe he mispronounced it. Maybe he meant an apostical
apostate. I think he meant an apostate ministry, not apostle.
I'm not going to name any names, but I was at a big healing vineyard type renewal conference thing in the States, and a guy came up front, and it was during the healing part of the service. He said, somebody here has a really, really bad headache. Somebody.
And all these people.
Okay.
There's got to be one.
Really bad headache right now. Anybody? Oh, it's me. And he fell.
Was he then healed?
Last summer, Matthew and I, Matthew had us do an alpha review series last summer. And this was a great idea. We do review series on Still Unbelievable from time to time. And they're all as a result of the hard work that Matthew puts in. But we were doing, I don't know, Matthew, is that week 9 that they were doing the miracle thing? I don't remember what week it was.
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah. So if you haven't heard that show, listeners, you can go back to the Alpha Review series. I think it's week 9. It'll be in the show notes and in the title. You can figure out which episode we're talking about here. But they took this Alpha. You guys will all know about the Alpha course, and they took this thing online. And week 9 has to do with God's power today. Are there still real miracles today? And so they talk about modern miracles for a good few minutes. And then at the end of this video, before they get the group together and everybody talks about modern miracles in these Zoom meetings, they put up for each group. So they had lots and lots of different groups going on at different times, a couple of times a day, every day of the week all summer. But for each group, if you were group 13, you had a different set of prophecies about miracles than if you were in group 12 or group 1 or group 24 or whatever. And it's exactly what David H. was talking about. So they had 2 columns of these words of power that these alpha representatives had. So they prayed, and God told them through their prayers that there would be somebody in each group that would have some sort of ailment, and these were supposed to be miracle prophecies, right? And it was somebody here hurt a knee rock climbing. Someone here has a headache. Someone here lost a child. Yeah, exactly.
Can apply to anyone.
Yeah, and it was just that kind of thing. Though Matthew did have an interesting experience there. Matthew, can you recall?
It was interesting, but when we analysed it and questioned it, we decided that it still didn't count. But what it was I got singled out individually by one of the people on the Alpha course and saying, did I know somebody by the name of Lily or Lillian? And I said, no, I didn't. And it wasn't till a few weeks later that my daughter reminded me that I talked about this girl that I met on the train when I used to commute by train to work, although I didn't by this time. And her name was Lily, and she had shared with me some of the difficult situations she was going through at the time. But the point that I made on that was I certainly wasn't the appropriate person to be reaching out to her for some kind of support. I didn't know her particularly well. I only knew her because I chatted to her a few times on the train, and she had other people who were closer to her and who were more emotionally suitable in terms of giving her support. She certainly wasn't anybody who would class as close on any kind of emotionally intimate way. Right. But it was quite interesting that this name had been called out. I denied it, and then my daughter had said a few weeks later, "What about that girl Lily that you talked to on the train?" It was quite amusing. But it's interesting how those kind of disparate coincidences can be connected together and be interpreted as a work of God.
Yeah, I went and studied at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, and then I went to McGill University in Montreal, and ended up in the Presbyterian Church. Loved Reformed theology, went in deep, and that's why I went into the Presbyterian Church rather than the Pentecostal Church, because I love the depth of theology and everything like that. But I got bored in the Presbyterian Church because I enjoyed hanging out with those kind of people in the charismatic church. Like, it was a lot more fun, even though there was a lot of crazy shit going on. I still had a lot more fun, and I still, enjoy those people, even though I don't necessarily agree with everything. But I certainly don't agree with everything. But and that's no longer my experience, and I'm no longer among that group. But yeah, it's interesting how very interesting all that stuff was, and the whole prophetic thing, the vineyard, was very much into that. So that was a huge part.
The thing is, when you're looking really hard for an act of God, you can find one. But the interesting thing is, everyone from other religions who worship other gods can find them too. The same way, Vishnu did this for me, and it's all of the same kind of stuff that a Christian, one who believes in God and miracles, by the way, a Christian would shrug off and say that's nonsense. But their encounters with God, those should be convincing. So everyone finds their God is very active if they really, really want him to be. And it's you have to be of a certain kind of mindset to really, really want to see it. And I've got to tell you, I wanted to see it, but I wasn't the kind of person who would invent it and then say it was there. Yeah. I wanted to actually see it. I didn't want to be put in a trance. I didn't want to, I was wary of self-hypnosis and things like that. I wanted to see a real thing that was easy to see. I didn't have to take a microscope and look at it and get, 3 philosophers and try to figure out what might have. I wanted to see it. And I just never did. But my demands to see it clearly were apparently too much. God doesn't work that way, apparently.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was going to say too that I would tap into the cult psychology piece as well, because Andrew, you were mentioning cults earlier. There's been so many studies that have shown that one thing cults and religions do really well is, this thing called mystical manipulation or milieu control, where they can, it seems spontaneous, the worship or the ecstatic experience or whatever it might be, the music and the chanting and the mantras or whatever you're doing in your particular religion or cult, and have a quote unquote experience with that, like you said, David, the divine, whoever it is, and you can engineer that through music and other kinds of meditations and liturgies and mantras and everything else. So that's not unique to Christianity by any stretch. You think I've had an experience with God? No, you just experienced mystical manipulation is what you did in a worship service.
David J. and I share a religious background. We're both Church of Christ, and
so was I.
I wonder if it's the same Church of Christ. So, no instrumental music, baptism's essential for salvation, husband is the head of the wife, all that Church of Christ, or a more liberal.
We had everything, but we had a piano and organ.
So you were a Church of Christ instrumental. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, but we did the whole baptismal regeneration thing, and we were part of the Bill Gothard cults.
I worshipped with that kind of Church of Christ at the end of my time in the church. I found a group of truly delightful people, by the way.
In the United States, that Church of Christ has more recently differentiated itself by changing the names on the signs and calling itself the Christian Church.
Yeah.
But so that's interesting. So firsthand the sorts of cult-like tactics that can come from that.
I was in a cult.
we were too. It's our claim to fame. Matthew, you had something to say. I'm sorry.
I was wanting to just edge the subjects along a little bit and talk a little bit about the effect that lockdown has had on our respective brands. I certainly know that for Still Unbelievable, when first lockdown happened in the UK, but it happened in many countries around the world within the sort of like the same 4-week period, the listeners of the Still Unbelievable podcast nosedived by around about 20%. I think that's how far there was a noticeable drop. It slowly climbed over the last 12 months. It dropped and then it's very quickly started climbing again, but not as quickly as it was climbing before. But I haven't gone back and looked through, but I'm pretty sure we're back to the numbers we were pre-lockdown and continuing to climb. So pleased by that. But it was the interpretation I made from that was podcast listening tends to be predominantly a commuter thing, a commuter pastime. And I think that's where a lot of people are consuming their podcasts. And so they're limited to what they can fit in during their commute. There are obviously other people who run or people who stay at home or whatever. I tend to listen to a podcast while I'm on the Xbox. I don't necessarily need the audio from the game, but there are many other ways of. So I noticed that. I'm wondering if the other podcasters on this episode, on this recording, also noticed something similar where they keep an eye on. And David H., if you noticed any change in interactions with your output during lockdown and what that was.
Well, I'll go first. I don't have a podcast. Guys started talking about deconstruction, actually using that word deconstruction in 2009. I don't know if anybody else had started or whatever, but I started talking about deconstruction way back then, and like very, very few people were really seemed to be talking about it and there was no organization at all. There was no sense of team or anything. And now, like in the past 18 months or 2 years, and especially since COVID, it seems everybody's talking about it and everybody's deconstructing, or, a lot of people are. And so my audience continues to grow. Instagram account just keeps growing and growing. And I keep talking about deconstruction, and I call it spiritual independence. By spiritual, I don't mean anything divine or miraculous or supernatural or anything. I mean basically personal growth, and then spiritual abuse and things like that. And people are gravitating towards it and appreciating what I do. So I haven't noticed a dip in my traffic. So, and I'm having a ball helping people
Okay, there's definitely a follow-up question I want to ask you, David, but that will distract us too much. So I want to hear from Clint and the other David first before I ask that.
Do you want to go ahead, David, and talk about your situation?
Sure. Skeptics and Seekers has it's done fine during the pandemic. I haven't noticed any real change, actually, but my podcast is maybe a little bit different from other podcasts. I don't think it is primarily a drive time thing for my community. It's more of a community. It's more of a blog and a discussion board. And so people are eager to discuss these issues, even if they haven't listened to the podcast. And so just as an example, the last series we did, it went on for a few weeks, four weeks, something like that, A Time to Kill. And we talked about different aspects of killing. The downloads of the show are running pretty consistent to any downloads from 2020 and 2019. But over that series, I just checked, there are 892 comments under that show. And so I think that people have an appetite to talk about things, and maybe they have time to talk about things, and maybe if they're working at home now instead of working in the office, they have an opportunity to just pop over and make a comment. And so since my community, I think of it more as more of a discussion-based community rather than a show-based community, I really have not seen any decline. If anything, there's been an increase of participation.
That was a particularly good series too. It's worth going and listening and getting involved. So.
Yeah, I would say for me, I mean, I resonate with what you just said, David, because I think I heard Dan Carlin, who's kind of the godfather of podcasting. He said one time, you have to find your audience. Your show's going to become what it's going to become, and it takes several years to sort of find your own niche, I think. And that's the way it was with me, because I started out as kind of a progressive Christian podcast. My last gasp of trying to save evangelicalism, as I was deconstructing, probably 2 or 3 years into the show, I realized I wasn't a Christian anymore, and I had to change the name of the show. And I went through a big shift there. And my audience has kind of found me, and I've kind of found them, in the sense that, like you said, David, it's all about community. So I have a closed Facebook group, but it's not very big. It's maybe 150 people that are Patreon supporters of the show. And I want to keep it small, because I know other podcasts will just create a Facebook group and open it up to anybody. They may have 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people, but I've seen those groups turn really dysfunctional and weird, and it's hard to manage. I don't want to do that. I'd rather have a fairly small group that we can have a really good interaction with the people in the group. And I've seen community is hugely important. So we do 1, maybe 2 Zoom calls a month with the people in the group. I have guests that have been on the show. They come back and they feature on the Zoom calls, and then we do a patrons only Zoom call just for the patrons of the show. So I've really probably the last year focused more and more energy on building that community for that base of support, especially with COVID, because people need the community more so than ever. So we started doing more and more Zoom calls, so that's kind of my focus the last year, I would say.
Okay. So, David H., the question I wanted to ask, which came from what you were saying, was about the whole deconstruction and religious trauma post-deconstruction experience. I know, Clint, you've been a little bit involved with that. So I wasn't there, so I'm hoping that one or both of you two were there. A name that will be familiar with a lot of our listeners, I hope, is Janice Selby. I know you've had her on your podcast, Clint.
Several times.
She ran this conference very recently about trauma and in deconstruction and stuff like that. Do either of you two want to talk? Because I'm sure you two are much more qualified to talk about that than myself.
Yeah, we were on the panel.
Excellent.
Yeah, me and David and Tim Sledge, we did a panel on one of the last sessions, wasn't it, David? On the Sunday, and there was like one more session after ours, but we got really good feedback from what I heard. They said it was one of the best sessions because we were so transparent. That's what I heard. They said we appreciated your honesty and your transparency talking about our time as ex-pastors and when we were pastors.
Excellent. It's really good feedback to hear. I wasn't able to join on that, and Also, I have to be honest, and perhaps you two could speak to this because it's as much of a question as it is a comment. One of the reasons why I didn't think very seriously about joining it was my deconstruction, my deconversion was more than 10 years ago now. While I am aware that there are many people who suffer trauma and significant personal stress following that, I don't consider myself one of those people, and I'm over it, so to speak. I'm at peace with my atheism. So that's part of the reason I kind of felt that maybe there wasn't anything for me, something like that. And maybe it was for people who need, I don't know what the right phrase is, but who need to appreciate and need to realize that there are other people who are experiencing a similar thing, and then there are professionals who can help talk them through that. I don't feel that I need any of that specific post-religion help. Mm-hmm. So should a person like me reconsider attending this kind of conference if Janice runs another one, and what would we expect there?
Well, my take on that is, for me, deconstruction, even though there was the initial trauma, mine was a perfect storm of leaving the ministry, leaving the church, leaving my vocation, my paycheck, filing for bankruptcy, kids leaving home to go to school or whatever, my wife going to university to get her nursing degree. I mean, everything happened all at once, perfect storm, trauma. For a few years, I had to get help. But following that, though, I now consider my deconstruction as not just a phase, but a way of life. So a lot of people say, what do you do after deconstruction? You have to reconstruct. And I'm like, no, I like open space. I'm an open concept kind of person, and including my house. So it's kind of a way of life for me. And I have friends locally who've also deconstructed, and we just enjoy hanging out, maybe having a bourbon and a cigar and just chatting about stuff, because there's a lot of kinship, let's say, between us, where we have similar stories, similar backgrounds. We get each other. We're kind of on the same page. We can laugh and joke and talk about all kinds of other things without having to kind of unwrap where each other's coming from. So for me, it's kind of a new kind of a community, like where I'm seeing I have an online community as well called The Lasting Supper, which I also try to keep very small, the Instagram community and so on, where we just are comfortable with one another. We have similar kind of backgrounds and stories, and we just enjoy being together, even though our beliefs or non-beliefs are very diverse. We just seem to fit well together. It's no longer trauma, but it's sort of a sense of being understood by one another, which overcomes an obstacle in making friendships, right? You
David H., where can people find The Lasting Supper? Is that a Facebook group? Where's the?
Well, actually, thelastingsupper.com is my website. It's there's a paywall. You pay $15 a month to be a part of the where I give weekly letters, and there's all kinds of resources and videos and interviews and things like that. But we also have a private Facebook group, and there's about a couple hundred people there, and I don't want it to get any bigger because I know other people who've tried, like Clint has said, who have tried to start such groups, and they've gotten too big and gotten very
endless refereeing. Yeah,
it can be very toxic.
Can I just add to the idea of being in continuous deconstruction? I'm glad that you said that. I sometimes get asked by Christians who are frustrated with me, why are you still doing this? If you've left, why don't you just leave us alone?
What's your point?
Yeah. And the fact of the matter is, it's like a scene between Batman and Joker. You made me. No, you made me.
Yeah. You can't escape it.
I was made into the person that I am. I was indoctrinated young into a family of very conservative Christians. I was taught early. I absorbed it like a sponge. I made it my life's mission. And at around 40, that started to change. 51 as of last month.
Teaser.
And so the fact of the matter is, what the hell do you expect me to do? If I did not talk about religion and theology and the effects of it, what the hell would I talk about? I have no idea, because this is so much of who I am and what I am. What do you do with that? At least I don't have a bunch of useless theological degrees. Because
we do.
Hey.
You're not worth the paper they're written on.
Yeah, right. I mean, what are you going to do with it at this point? But
you quit preaching and started meddling now,
it's
buddy.
Still like
now you're meddling.
Huge part of my life, though, that you can't just excise and then
just turn
be
it off.
Something else.
Yeah.
This is, for better or worse, what I am, and so I have to find healthy outlets, things to do that I think are good and useful and helpful to the world with that information. Yeah. So, I mean, I will never not be deconstructing.
Yeah. Well, what's funny about that is Matthew and I have 2 podcasts. It started out as Still Unbelievable and Asking Atheist Anything, and I had this grand idea 2 years ago now. Well, a little less than 2 years ago now. We were going to take Asking Atheist Anything and change it to a variety podcast. We were not going to talk about religion and spirituality on 2 separate podcasts. We were going to do religion and spirituality and skepticism and all of that under the Still Unbelievable umbrella, and we renamed Asking Atheist Anything to Proscenium. And it's languishing badly. Matthew, is that overstating the case? Proscenium's languishing, you think?
Yeah, we're neglecting it.
Yeah. So we're not good, David J. We're not good at talking about it. And I really wanted to, right? I really wanted it to be some discussion about anything but religion, anything but the intersection between atheism and humanism and Christianity and Islam. Anything but that.
But like a sea bream, you just can't get that hook out of your mouth.
Can't escape it.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to go back.
Andrew's on my show more than I am.
Right. I was going to say something about Matthew's point originally about why the Religious Trauma Syndrome Conference. It was actually called CORT 2021. If you want to look it up, you can actually purchase the video sessions and watch them if you missed the live sessions. But going back, there's 2 reasons I would say why a person like you say, I'm over it. I don't have religious trauma. Why should I attend 2022 next year? 2 reasons. One is that, first of all, you'll have a greater understanding of what religious trauma or RTS is, so you can help someone who may be suffering from it, and you can identify it. You can talk about it knowledgeably, say, okay, this is what RTS is. Here's some resources. That's a good sort of starting point. But then secondly, I think you might find, Matthew, that you actually do have some religious trauma that you might be unaware of. And when you are in a situation like that, where you're hearing people describe what RTS is and what the symptoms of it are and how it's caused, you might re-examine your past, time in evangelicalism and say, actually, I was traumatized. I just didn't realize it. Because even the panel that David and I and Tim sat on, we were talking about our traumas as pastors. And that brought up a whole bunch of stuff for me that I had forgotten about. That was almost 20 years ago now. But I'm like, holy shit, man, I was really, really deeply traumatized by the church, abused by the congregation when I was a pastor. And I kind of swept all that under the rug. But it brought up a lot of stuff. And I said, my God, I got to deal with that now. There's another piece that's just come up. It's like the layers of the onion.
Thank you, Clint. That was a really honest and helpful answer. Thanks for that.
We wanted to talk about 2020 in the state of skeptical podcasting, and 2020 was quite the shit show for a number of reasons. But we actually did have race riots, and so for those who didn't get to live through earlier race riots, we had those. So there you go, kids. Freedom marches, civil rights speeches, the works. So
a government in denial.
2020. I wanted to mention this just as a state of being completely honest and transparent for a show like this. And I won't call any names here, but there was an incident that almost ended Skeptics and Seekers for me that no one knows about because I haven't talked about it, and no one knows how close I came to turning off the mic and never turning it on again. At least not for Skeptics and Seekers. And so I was the guest on a show that I enjoy, and I don't want to call a name because I really like the person. They're good people. But we did a show, an interview, and there was a segment in the interview about race and some of the things that were going on. And of course, you don't run into a lot of black atheists to talk about some of this stuff. And so this was an opportunity. I wanted to make myself available for as many people as possible, even though it's not a subject I like talking about these days. But there was a segment in the show where I talked about the history of race and the church, because there is a deep history there that is little known by the average church goer. Although I suppose pastors who have a good education would know about it, and those who just want to know, it's not secret information. It's out there. So I talked a bit about that because it was in the context of whether we were going through systemic racism or not. And it's so easy for good Christian people, and I will call them good Christian people, to not understand why we say it's systemic. They don't understand. They don't know the entire narrative. Right. And so this was a time when I just spoke historically on the subject, but the host decided at the last minute to just edit that entire section out. It was not because it was fact checked and I said some things that were untrue, or it wasn't anything like that. The host admitted that it was just too hot for them to handle. And my suspicion, this is a person who may not be completely out as an atheist. Maybe they have an audience that a lot of Christians or what have you, but they didn't want to tackle this topic. And the fact of the matter is, this is a topic that nobody wants to tackle. Racism in the church. Christians certainly don't want to tackle it. It is hot. It is incendiary. And there is a reason why churches are happy to keep their members ignorant about horrible things done not that long ago by churches that are extremely well documented. We got this way on purpose. It took effort to get this way. And this is the part of the story, I think, that doesn't get told. But when a good white atheist decided that they couldn't deal with that, it made me wonder, hell, we're in the middle of one of the most important moments in our living history. Mm-hmm. Are the people who are supposed to be speaking difficult truths in these difficult times. This is our moment. You don't, as a podcaster, we don't get too many moments where there is all the situation is around us for us to say something that is really important to a lot of people. And this was the moment, and this was the time, and nobody could handle it. And I thought, if we can't talk about this, what the hell are we doing? Why is this just performative art? Or is it just entertainment at this point? Are we just filling space? Because it meant something to me, and it's hard for me to talk about these things as it is. And yet, one of the best of us made the judgment that no, society just isn't ready for that. And I got to tell you, I grew up listening to that about so many things. Yeah, society isn't ready for that yet. Well, fuck it. If society isn't ready for that, it's time to change society, or I want to get off the train, because I don't I have no idea why I push myself week after week after week to do this. If this represents a bigger issue in our community that we really don't want to tackle important things. That I really thought very strongly about hanging up my spurs, and I still think strongly about it. There may not be a season 4 of Skeptics and Seekers, and there's one other reason for that, and I don't know if we'll get to it or not. But I'm curious, have you guys thought about hanging it up? I mean, were there things last year in recent years that made you think, you know what, this is not a great use of my time? Anything.
A little story. I'm not a podcaster, but I just want to interject a little story. I was interviewed for a magazine in Canada put out by the United Church of Canada, Broadview magazine, and a few of the contributors were asked to please show up on a Zoom, sort of an interview for their readers, and there was over 200 people showed up. So there was me. I was called a disruptor. I was a part of their disruptor column, and there was a black woman, Joylene from Georgia, I believe, actually. Joylene Mainzanese. So this black woman was interviewed, and she actually did a column for Broadview magazine on depictions of Jesus as black. And she talked about how she grew up believing Jesus was black because the only depictions of Jesus she saw were of black Jesus. So she was sharing her own story. And I got more and more nervous as time went on because you could see the other attendees, and I could see people starting to stir in their seats and things. And then she was very excited to offer her email if anybody had any questions or wanted to reach her. And then we were supposed to stay following the interview just to hang out on the Zoom call, just in a relaxed manner. But when they opened it up for questions, it was horrible. It was just like, I just got so depressed because people just weren't getting it. And I could see her starting to, it was just very, very uncomfortable. And I knew this isn't going well. This is horrible, just horrible. People talking about how Jesus could be white, and you see Jesus as black because you're black, and blah blah blah. And anyway, when the interview was over, she got off the call and she didn't stay. She didn't linger behind to hang out. And I reached out to her by email and silence. I mean, so it was just a horrible experience. And that to me was very, 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 very discouraging. It was a sign that I don't know what to say about it. Just that it was very discouraging to me that we're still there.
When I was just to add a little fuel to this fire, as if it needs any. David and I are from the same part of Central Alabama, so I'm in Georgia, but I grew up in the heart of the Bible Belt. I grew up in Central Alabama, and during this last year, while we were having mostly peaceful protests, so we talk about race riots, but the results from last year's protests have been folded, spindled, and mutilated already. And most gatherings last year were peaceful. But here was the interesting messaging that was the crossover between the pandemic and our civil rights protests last year. The conservative people around me, I live in two conservative circles, one here in Georgia and my family in Alabama. The messaging was out of these people, don't they know there's a pandemic? They're making it worse by gathering. Mm-hmm. Now, why is that? Why is that so strange? These are the people who won't take a vaccine shot. These are the people who won't wear their masks. These are the people who don't think there's a pandemic.
Right.
Except when it suits them. And so I was like, ooh. So I ended up in a bit of a fight with a family member over this. And at any rate, it is it was an important moment. It still is an important moment. The problem is that as we start to pull back the cover on police and police culture, we're finding more and more incidents right now in the United States. It's not like we've had Derek Chauvin's trial, right? And he was convicted, and now there's a lot of reform. Speaking as a white guy who doesn't know as much about this as he probably should know, I can say this. I don't see the reform that people are saying is happening. Where is it? Because here in Georgia, it's not happening. It's just not happening. And if you live in a part of the United States, dear listener, if you're listening to the podcast and you live in a place where there is substantial police reform, and yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and say I'm calling for it. If you live in a part of the United States where there is substantial police reform, reasonpress@gmail.com. Write in. Tell me what it is.
So is it possible for me to say one more thing before I go? I've got to run here.
I'm sorry, David, but yeah, go for it.
Yes.
Say it.
Yeah, no, it's look, I do Skeptics and Seekers. We do 5-hour podcasts, man. This is a lightweight.
Regularly.
But
I'll gladly be your lightweight any day, David.
But I do have a task that is that I'm going to have to do. So I do apologize for being the one to have to go enjoying this so much. But I wanted to share one other thing, and I hope you guys do get to talk about it a little bit, because I'd be curious to what you have to say. The other thing that makes me consider not podcasting anymore is the fact that I am, how shall I say, I'm disappointed with the Christians, which is a strange thing to say. We know who they are. They know who we are. Let me say it this way. When I was a Christian, even when I was a kid, I would have jumped at the chance to be on a show done by atheists to defend the faith. I mean, that's where you want to be. You know, I was ready to answer questions and talk about what I believed. My father, he used to pay to do a radio show. You know, we were those people, you know, I guess. And so one of the most disappointing things that I have found, especially over the last year, but it's been there, is how difficult it is to get Christians to come on the show and just talk about what they believe. I've made it as easy as possible. It doesn't have to be a debate. It doesn't have to be. I just want people to represent what they really think about stuff, and let's have an honest conversation about it. It's hard to get that done on a podcast. It's hard to get that done on a discussion board. I don't know if Christians are just afraid now, if they are wary. What we get is a kind of this academic type Christian, or Christians who want to pretend to be academic Christians. We get both of them. There are honest academics, and then there are people who just think that that's the better way to be. And they end up talking about a kind of Christianity that nobody actually believes in the pews. They pretend like the more basic kind of Christianity just doesn't exist, or it's an anomaly. You can't get anyone to talk about it. And frankly, I don't do the show so that I can rant or to talk to other atheists. I want to talk to Christians. I want to talk to people about what they believe and why they believe it, and let's have an examination of opinions. And I don't care what your opinion is, and I don't care how much I disagree with it. We can have a civil conversation, but just come on the show and be honest about it, and don't try to hide the God because you think it's a losing argument or whatever. And I just feel like in many ways skeptics have flubbed it. on some things, and Christians have flubbed it, and the conversation is not getting better. We're not having real conversations about real things that matter. And I've probably only got one more season left in me. And if things don't pick up where there's what I consider genuine communication with real people who believe real things, I don't see the point.
Before you go, I want to say two things and get your response. So, we're going to talk about this at some point over the next couple of days offline. But I see the problem that you see, and you and I have both talked about my consideration of of hanging up all the equipment and not doing another show ever. I've got a young child. I could use those hours to be interacting with her. And frankly, though people don't know, getting ready for a podcast, even one where we're just going to sit around and chat, we're just going to kick the can. There's mental preparation that goes into every one of these shows, and it is not easy. And so even when we're just going to sit around and chat, right, there's an hour and a half, 2 hours of preparation that goes into just picking up a mic and saying nothing interesting. So what you hear here, it's not the whole story. But all of that said, I think the problem between atheists and Christians is we have a worldview, and Christians don't see, like one of the most common complaints is, without a God, you can't have ethics. And if that's really your view, right, if you've really bought that as an atheist, I can't have a set of meaningful ethics, then we're going to have a hard time getting started. But I think the bigger problem is that what not skepticism, but what secular society has done is by and large identify the ethical bankruptcy that exists in a lot of Christianity. This is not a blanket accusation against every Christian, but it is an identification of a problem that I think Christianity more broadly has, and that is the willingness to sell its soul for someone like Donald Trump, just as the most recent example. But we have examples from the past of Christian churches paying people who have had abortions to come out and speak out against abortions. They paid them off to speak out. And because they could find women who were in bitter circumstances that needed money, they could just pay them to carry the water for the Christian side. And that has come out in the news in the last year, right? Because these are real problems, the Catholic Church and child abuse, the Mormon Church and child abuse, because secular society has identified the ethical bankruptcy in Christianity. I think it is very hard for a lot of Christians to come forward and say, I'm willing to defend Christian ethics. So, David, before you leave, I want you to say something about that, if you feel like it.
I don't mind having debates about ethics and and even when someone is saying something offensive, like, I can't possibly be ethically centered because, I don't have a grounding or a basis for ethics. I can have a conversation as long as I am talking to someone who actually believes what they're saying and is passionate about what they're saying, and we can have an honest exchange. But frankly, we did a series on morality for several weeks.
Another good one
on SNS. Yeah, it was good, except what we got from a lot of Christians was stuff they had to spend time looking up. Well, this is what the seminary says. This is what Augustine said. This is what,
Right.
And they're not actually speaking from a place of, this is what I believe about my religion and my faith. And so, honestly, I don't need Christians to come on my show and present a better Christianity. I need them to come on the show and talk about the real Christianity that they actually believe in every day. I want them to talk about the God they actually pray to. I want them to, have the courage of their convictions. If they believe the world is 6,000 to 10,000 years old, just say that. And let's have an honest conversation. If you believe that atheists, have a missing piece of their soul, say that. Let's have a conversation. But I don't feel like the conversation is very genuine these days, and it just feels more like a performance. On the side of the skeptic hosts, the one piece of advice I would leave all people doing a podcast is stop being afraid. There are things to be afraid of. I understand that. We take a big risk to talk about some of the things that we talk about. But we are in a unique position to say things that matter, and that we will pay a social penalty for saying certain things and talking about certain things. But don't half-ass it. So if you feel like you can't talk about a thing, don't talk about it. Start a podcast about computers. Start a podcast about cooking. Do what you can do all the way, but don't talk about atheist issues in a half-assed way. You'll do more harm than good. So understand that there's a social price to be paid, and then man up and pay it. I got to run. Thanks.
Thank you, David.
Thanks for
Always
being
a
here,
pleasure.
David.
Thanks, David.
Yeah, so the race thing, the last 18 months have not been good for race. And from me looking at America from someone who's rarely been there, when the whole George Floyd stuff kicked off, so that really underplays the seriousness of that. But when I watched it, the thing that went through my mind is, has nothing changed since Rodney King? And that left me really, really disappointed. We need to move on as a society. We as people of all races, but it does seem that white people especially, we need to be better. We need to treat people who don't share our skin tone so much better. And yes, there are some wonderful, wonderful Christians, and I'm related to some wonderful, wonderful Christians, but it does seem that the church has some responsibility for holding us back.
Yeah, it does. It's baked into the system. Like David was saying, it goes way back. I mean, you could go back to the roots. I mean, America was founded on, it's a huge part of its economy was slave owning of Africans. And that's part of American economy. And it's systemic, like he was saying. It's baked into the system. And now we're seeing, like in the Trump era, an increasing marriage between the alt-right and the Christian right, which is another hugely concerning development. So again, that we're seeing all that kind of stuff happening in the last 4 or 5 years. It was already there, but Trump just gave permission to it. He's shown a light on it and encouraged it.
Right, became the figurehead for it.
Yeah. He would amplify it. He retweeted white supremacist tweets and all that kind of thing. And he was, hugely supported by evangelicals. And, Sarah Posner talks about this in her book Unholy. She makes the case that the Christian right and the alt-right are coming together more and more. So you're seeing, on the January 6th insurrection was a classic case study. You had white nationalists, Christian supremacists praying in the Capitol, as they're storming the building for Donald Trump to stop the election results. It all kind of came together in that one event.
Voted down today by the Republicans, by the way.
Yep, and they don't want to talk about it. They were just tourists. They were just there to, shake a few hands and take a few selfies, and it's gaslighting. It's exactly what it is.
And we had people directly impacted. The police officer's wife, the police officer that was killed in the riots. His wife begged. We had mothers of police officers beg Congress to vote yes to the January 6th commission, and the Republicans voted it down. And I as an American, I guess am I the only American now? Okay, so David's an American, but he's
American.
Oh, are you? Okay, but that's right. But
yeah,
you're in
I just happen
England.
to live in the UK.
Right.
We're expats.
Right. So I can say that as an American, I am deeply, deeply upset by voting the commission down. It is one thing to think that they were tourists, right? It is fine to have the alternative view, but if we have such opposing narratives, one narrative is these people were insurrectionists and they were on the verge of destroying the U.S. democracy. And the other view is, no, they weren't, they were tourists. Well, that sounds like fertile ground for a commission to uncover the truth. And to vote it down is, to me, the thing that most validates that Republicans have lost their center. American democracy no longer important. I don't know. Sorry, I will quit monologuing over it. I am hugely disappointed.
Yeah.
I'm hugely disappointed.
I think a question I'd like to ask, I think, Clint, you're probably best placed to answer this, to see whether or not it's a genuine observation that I think I see or whether I'm just blind to it myself. But it does seem to me that the relationship between... I'll start again. There does seem to be a very strong relationship between evangelical Christianity and a poor relationship between white people and other races. But that seems to be very most... As a British person here, I see most of that over in the US. It always seems to be America has that problem. When I look here in the UK, yes, there are Christians representative in that group, but it's not to the same degree as I see in America. The people that I associate with being racist here in the UK are the thugs, are the football hooligans, and I don't automatically assume that they're Christians. They're just that part of British society who are thuggish. Am I reading that right, or do you think I've got a blind spot?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to hear what David has to say as well. But I mean, someone said, I can't remember who said it, but the most racially segregated hour in America is on Sunday morning. It's true, isn't it? Okay. You got your churches down the street. You got your Hispanic church, your African American church, your Asian church, your white church. And on paper, they're all Christians. They should be in community with each other, but they don't. They don't mix. They don't mingle. They kind of stay in their own lane. So that's been a historic thing. Look at the Azusa Street revival. That was a big thing because it mixed African Americans and whites back in 1906 in Los Angeles, and even that was scandalous. To have that happening in church or in religion and Christianity, to mix races. So it's an interesting phenomenon, isn't it? It's long been a part of American history.
When the
observations in the UK.
Yeah, I don't see it as much, but I mean, I think the UK, the parts of the UK that I live in are pretty white bread, man.
Yes,
I mean,
true.
I teach at a campus where we have probably 3,000 students, and there's hardly any students of color just on the campus, and same with staff. There's a couple of people of color, the rest were all white, and it's just the demographics, I guess. It's not because we're discriminatory, it's just that's where we happen to be.
It's very much the same in the part of the UK that I live as well. I can go for weeks without seeing somebody who's non-white.
Right, but if I go to Leeds, for example, where my daughter lives, there's a huge Asian population, huge African population. Leeds, Bradford, those kind of areas are completely different. You'll see women walking down the street with full, burqas and everything else, and it's a complete, Sikhs and Muslims and people from all around that part of the world. I mean, it's completely different area of the country, isn't it?
Yeah.
So Matthew, what is left? What is left on our?
This is it. It's probably not a good idea to move on to another subject. So, anything else anybody wants to say on the subject at hand?
Could I just say, just recently I read Howard Thurman's book, Jesus and the Disinherited, and he shares an interesting story in that book, powerful little pamphlet book, where his grandmother couldn't read, and she was she was an ex-slave, like she was that old that she used to be a slave on a plantation. And she would have him read the Bible to her, but not Paul. And
Interesting.
He never had the nerve to ask her why, until much later in life he came to discover that plantation owners, masters, would have their preachers preach from Paul, because he was all about slaves obey your masters, women submit. And order. Paul was all about order, and to avoid the Gospels and Jesus and so forth. And it's interesting because Jesus, the historical Jesus, if there was a historical Jesus, but the historical Jesus would have been a member of the oppressed class. He was a member of the oppressed people who were occupied by Rome. And Paul, on the other hand, was a privileged Roman, and he in the New Testament we see where he actually used this privilege to his advantage. And so I found that very, very interesting, how Paul is very much favored by evangelicals.
Yeah,
right.
If
you're
most churches,
he is all about order and the
authority
and the use of power to achieve a goal. And so I just found that all very fascinating, that the way racism is now and how it's supported by the right and by the evangelical church in America, evangelical with a capital E, and how it's all linked to Paul and it all goes back to the Bible. And, even, there's people even still arguing about how slavery is sanctioned in the Bible. There's people still talking about it.
Sure.
If it's, legit. And so I just found that all very, very fascinating from a black theologian.
Right. So if you're one of the Christians listening to Still Unbelievable, first, thank you for listening this far. Second, if you wonder what we're talking about, and you're just not particularly familiar with your New Testament, let me ask you to press pause, go read the book of Philemon. It's quite short. And then come back and press play again, because what we're on about here in regard to the Apostle Paul centers around the book of Philemon. And if you lose, yes, I wish you would lose Philemon, but if you use Philemon as a sort of magnifying glass to elucidate Paul's other writings on being a servant, on being a slave to Christ, that kind of thing, you sort of get that Paul was part of he was part of the privileged class. Yes. And it is very, very, it's very easy to see how a plantation owner 200 years ago would use Philemon to keep his slaves in line. But not only that, because it's worse than just keeping slaves in line. This is the slave owner's moral authority handed down from on high through the Apostle Paul.
Right.
So if you're not familiar with your New Testament, press pause, go read Philemon, come back and press play.
If we can carry the argument further as well, most New Testament scholars agree that Paul wrote Romans, Galatians, maybe Philippians. The rest is Pauline, written by his followers and so forth. Especially the pastoral epistles. Most New Testament scholars agree that wasn't written by Paul, but somebody who came along and organized Paul even further than Paul was organized, and where you got First, Second Timothy, and so on and so forth. So it's like, the attempt as we get further away from the historical Jesus to organize and structure and authorize and legitimize and everything was in full swing.
Yeah, I was jumping on Andrew's point about Philemon too. I wanted to say that I was thinking about this the other day driving to work, and I was thinking, it struck me that, in the book of Philemon, Paul, the character Paul, basically manipulates Philemon into accepting Onesimus, who was a runaway slave. He sends him back to his master and says, you have to accept him back. Don't judge him too harshly, because basically you owe me your salvation. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't even be a Christian. So there's all these power play dynamics at work and manipulation. And yet, if I've read a book where it talks about this, if Paul was really that, just mind-blowingly original, he would have helped Onesimus to escape. He would have said, get away. This is a corrupt, foul, unjust system of slavery. But he doesn't. He says, slaves, obey your masters, go back to your master and knuckle under the system. And he manipulates him into doing so. So it's a completely different reading of Philemon than when I was in Bible college.
Well, one of the most used for women to go back to their abusive husbands.
Yeah, same dynamic.
Yeah.
One of the most cognitively dissident moments in the New Testament, for me as an excerpt, is when Paul tells Philemon to treat his slave as a brother.
Right.
So the slave's supposed to return. Philemon's supposed to treat him as a brother. Right. But here's the problem. A brother is not a slave, and a slave is not a brother. And if you can read that phrase, and say, oh yeah, that makes sense, I can treat my slave as a brother, that's when you should actually find the exit, because somewhere in your mind you have allowed rationality to be set aside to accept something that, in my view today as a non-Christian, I no longer have a way to make sense of it. Treat your slave like a brother. Well, then they're no longer a slave. And maybe I'm just missing something, but it is one of the most cognitively dissident passages in the New Testament for me as a non-Christian today.
Thanks for that, Andrew, and I'm very conscious of the time, so I'll give my two guests a chance to give their final words, and I'll close up. So thank you very much, both of you. It's been a pleasure having you on. Take it away.
Thanks so much for having me, and hello to everybody out there. And if you're interested in anything I'm doing, my cartoons or whatever, you can find me at nakedpastor.com, and I'm on all social media platforms, but and I'm pretty good I'm very good actually at responding to direct messages and emails and so on. So thanks again, guys, for having me on the show.
I would say the same thing. I'm very active on social media. You can find me on Twitter at MindShift 2018. You can look up the MindShift podcast. There's links on my Twitter page to the iTunes and all the other platforms that I'm on. So yeah, same thing. If you message me or whatever, I'll respond pretty quickly as well.
And thank you both. And both of you came on at relatively short notice for this show. So thank you for tolerating my haphazard approach to organisation. You were both clearly much better at it than I am, but you've both brought some wisdom and some interesting dialogue to this conversation. So thank you very much. And I think really as a final thought that I would say, well, actually, the big thing that I wanted to say, the big exciting news for me and my family from the past year is right at the beginning of lockdown 1, my family, we all decided to go vegan. We decided to give it a go, and we've maintained it through. So that's been the really big change, the really big decision in my family. It was following a conversation with Alex O'Connor, the Cosmic Skeptic, over on the Proscenium brand, which Andrew mentioned earlier. We've upheld it's really easy when you're at home and you're not going out and you're not entertaining. The challenge now starts when we go out and visit friends and family, or we have friends and family. And so the next 12 months are going to be us working out how we manage that. So there we go. Thank you to David again for David J, that is, for joining us. I always appreciate Dave J coming on. And David, when you do get around to listening to this, you're welcome to come on here and say anything incendiary you like. I definitely won't cut you. I appreciate the voice that you have, and I appreciate the way in which you say it and the polemic that you bring to the conversation. So thank you for that. And the other amusing undesigned coincidence here is as we're recording now, the episode of Still Unbelievable that is current live, the most recent one, is actually on race. Andrew and I, earlier in the year, with regular guest Darren, we took part in the Christian Evidence Society sessions where they talked about various things, and one of their sessions was about race. And so the episode that is live now on Still Unbelievable, although by the time you listen to this, you'll have to rewind about 6 episodes, is us talking about race. And the sad thing about that episode is it's 3 white guys talking about a black guy talking about race. We need to change that dynamic. We need to mix it all up, and we need to be far more inclusive in the way that we do. I didn't arrange it like that. It just happened like that. But everybody with white skin, we need to rethink race. We need to be far more proactive about our brothers who have just a slightly different skin color. We need to be better people. And on that note, you guys, thank you so much again. Go and have your food or whatever it is that you need to have. And we'll be back here again sometime soon. Cheers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Go Microsoft.
Yeah. You did that.
Too late. You didn't get it in there.
Thank you, guys. You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.